to fight for those that have been most vulnerable, those who our society is tempted to leave behind if we don't speak up. So God, we ask tonight that you would magnify our voices. That God, if there be one that is joining us on tonight that feels like they're not strong enough to speak, like they're not powerful enough to make a difference, God, we ask that you would shift them on tonight. Shift them in such a way that they begin to stand on solid ground, to stand tall and mighty and strong, and to believe that collectively we can move mountains. So God, move in the midst of all we do on tonight, in order that we may be granted wisdom and knowledge and understanding to be able to move on behalf of those who are most afflicted and most vulnerable at this time. We ask this in the name of my Savior, Jesus. Amen. And so again, as we begin this evening, I'm going to ask that as you begin to think of questions that you may have, that you want to ask tonight, that you would put those into the chat box, and then with those questions will be addressed at a later time during this meeting. So again, thank you all so very much for joining us tonight. And so with that said, I'd like to introduce to you Miss Alicia Garza from the Black Futures Lab. Alicia.
Thank you so much, Reverend Manning. We so appreciate you opening us in a prayerful way, and also reminding us that the tasks that we have in front of us at this moment is to make sure that nobody gets left behind. My name is Alicia Garza, and I am the principal of the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund. Our organizations were created to make Black communities powerful in politics so that we can be powerful in every other aspect of our lives. What we know is that the challenges and the problems that are facing our communities, they are endemic, they are long-term, but their solutions require innovation, experimentation, and most of all, the solutions to the challenges that we face require Black communities having political power. And so we do a lot of work at the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund to build the capacity of our communities to build the political power that we deserve. It's really incredible to see so many important, wonderful people joining us this evening from all over the country. So shout outs to all of you. I see everybody in the chat. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes just talking a little bit about the Black Futures Lab and the work that we've been doing around really better understanding the conditions that Black communities are facing across the country. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about our partnerships. I've known Miss Gina and Mr. Johnson for a very long time, and we've been so excited to work with both of their organizations over the last couple of years. And then I'll end by talking a little bit about the Black policy agenda for 2020 and beyond. So to start our work, we set out to better understand what it is that Black communities are facing across the country. What we know is that Black communities are not a monolith. And usually the way that we're talked about by elected officials or politicians, right, is that we all think the same things, we all live the same lives, we all experience the same things. But at the end of the day, what's real is that we are an incredibly complex set of communities. And so we set out to show what that complexity looked like. We developed what we called the Black Census Project, which to date is the largest survey of Black people in America that's been conducted in more than 155 years. The last time a project of this type was attempted was right after slavery was formally abolished in this country. And the United States government had undertaken a survey project to better understand the needs of newly emancipated people. We think it's a little bit ridiculous that it's taken 155 years for there to be a survey done of this type. But what we really wanted to accomplish was to engage our friends and family across the country who we know are deeply rooted in our communities, and to get a better sense of the complex story of who Black folks are. We partnered with more than 26 organizations in 28 states across the country that had, high densities of Black populations, but that also were rooted in Black communities that we often don't hear much about. We did surveys of Black folks who are currently and formerly incarcerated. We did surveys of Black folks who are both immigrants to this country and Black folks who are born in this country. We did surveys of Black folks who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming. And we also did surveys of Black communities across the political spectrum. What we wanted to make sure of was that nobody could accuse us of only talking to a certain group of Black folks. And so together we set out to reach as many Black folks as we possibly could. And we were able to reach more than 30,000 Black people across various demographics, regions, geographies, and experiences. And what we found was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Of course, you would think if you tuned into, the television during any election season, you would think that the issue that all Black people care about is criminal justice reform. And we do care about that very much because it impacts our families, our loved ones, our children, and our lives. However, what we found from the Black Census Project is that the #1 issue that is keeping Black communities awake at night is low wages that are not enough to support a family. We also found that the #2 and 3 issue that people are most concerned about include lack of access to affordable and quality healthcare and lack of access to affordable and quality housing. Now, of course, those issues are not at all separate from the issues of criminal justice reform. And in fact, they are deeply, deeply connected. There are many ways in which the insecurity of our lives leads to an overrepresentation of our communities inside of cages across the country. When it came to our partnerships in Louisiana, we partnered specifically with Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children and Ubuntu Village to really make sure that we were capturing a particular experience throughout Louisiana. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to share some of the top line results from the Black Census Project in the state of Louisiana. We had about 1,500 survey responses throughout the whole state. The people who were responding to that survey were generally ages 18 to 44. What we found was that as it relates to Louisiana, people said that 67% of our respondents in the state said that the killing of Black people by police was a major problem. 71% said that low wages that were not enough to sustain a family was a major problem. And then finally, we found that folks in Louisiana also said that the lack of affordable health care is a major problem. 68% of our respondents in this state. Coupled with that, we also asked questions about political participation. And what we found was that the majority of respondents from Louisiana indicated that if they did not vote in the 2016 election, 36% of respondents said that they did not vote because they had a felony conviction. And so again, you can see here the relationship between the insecurity of our lives and the lack of political power and the relationship to the criminal justice system, which we should really be just calling the criminal system because there is no justice in the system that keeps our families and our communities in cages. There's lots more to say about the Black Census Project, and I encourage you to take a look at the data that we've released. You can find that data at blackcensus.org. We separated out some of the most common responses in a series of 3 reports that look specifically at political participation, that looks at how we understand and how we experience issues through the lens of gender and sexuality. And we also looked specifically at the issues looking through the lens of gender. You can also find out more about the results of the Black Census Project by going to the Black Futures Lab website. For us, we thought that this survey process was important for a number of reasons. We wanted to collect the stories and experiences of Black communities that never get counted in these kinds of surveys. We wanted to change the story of who Black people are and who we can be in this moment. But we also were very keen in understanding that just around the corner, a major election was coming. And you all know that we are now smack in the middle of a moment in this country where we are at the intersections of three major crises. One of those crises is a public health crisis, which was already bad before COVID-19 hit the shores of America and has gotten even worse. We are in the center of a crisis of democracy where many of us don't know how we'll be able to participate in elections moving forward, if there will be elections in November, and if our right to participate will be protected. And then finally, of course, we are facing a major economic crisis all at the same time. What we know is that Black communities are disproportionately impacted by cases of the coronavirus as well as deaths from the coronavirus. And we know that this is not simply a matter of bad behavior amongst Black communities, like some commentators would like us to think. We know that the vulnerability of our communities in relationship to COVID has everything to do with the vulnerability of our communities that existed before it. And so for us, in conducting this census project, we didn't want to just collect research and have it sit on a table somewhere and collect dust. It was very important to us that these data points actually turned into policy that we could fight for together in our states, in our communities, and of course, in our country. And that's where the Black Agenda for 2020 and beyond comes from. We really took the data from the Black Census Project. We took the recommendations that we asked people about in the Black Census Project of how to resolve the major problems that we face in our communities. And we translated that into a policy agenda that we know elected officials and people who are making decisions need to be having at the forefront for any policies that are written from this moment forward. I will say that our agenda has a list of issues that we are trying to address, but I want to talk a little bit about the framework of the agenda because it is an important way for us to understand what is wrong with policy in this country and why policy leaves Black communities behind. First and foremost, we think that any policies that are going to uplift and expand access to resources for Black communities have to be what we call race forward and not race neutral. Too many times we try to advance policy that doesn't take into account specifically the ways in which Black communities have been harmed for generations, the position that that harm puts our communities in today, but also not talking about the elephant in the room never solves the problem. And so for us, any policy that is going to really change conditions in Black communities has to be race forward and not race neutral. We don't have time for talking out both sides of our mouths here. We have to acknowledge the fact that Black communities have been left out and left behind, and therefore our policies have to reflect proactive solutions to closing that gap from where we are now and where we deserve to be. The second thing that we think is important about our policy agenda is that we say that government must be held accountable. If you were to talk to legislators in many of your states, they would say that they don't even want government to exist, much less have a say over how resources are being distributed. If we left it up to some of our governors, some of our mayors, some of our congresspeople, they would say everybody's got to take responsibility for themselves and it's not the job of the government to invest in our communities. We know that that is a 30-year strategy that has been used to disenfranchise our communities, to leave our communities without the kinds of resources that we need. And we know that this has been a strategy to rob our communities of the power that we deserve. So from our perspective, any policies that are being moved in this moment need to put the responsibility back into the hands of government and not leave responsibility for solving the challenges that are endemic to our communities in the hands of big business or corporations. We already know where that leads us. And then finally, the Black Policy Agenda, the Black Agenda 2020, is really focused on ensuring that we understand that a progressive agenda is what is going to move Black communities forward. We are very concerned, especially in this moment, that the movement that has been gaining steam for 30 years has also impacted our imagination for what's possible in our communities. At the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, we believe that Black communities deserve to be powerful. And in order for that to be real, we have to make sure that the policies that we are advancing are actually taking into account our most vulnerable, who've been made vulnerable by rigged rules that are intentionally leaving us behind. We call an agenda that rids ourselves of rigged rules a progressive agenda. And we believe that in order to advance the needs and dreams and visions of Black communities, we have to be forwarding an agenda that does just that. So with that being said, I want to just wrap up by saying that in our partnership with Ubuntu Village and Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, we did not just set out to conduct a survey, we set out to really build the capacity of these two incredible organizations to have their work lifted up, as it very well should be, as a model for how it is that we step into the gap that our government has left for us. It is Miss Gina and Mr. Ernest and so many other brave, brilliant freedom fighters who have dared to say that children don't belong in cages, who have dared to say that the rules are rigged in Louisiana and we have to change that in order to improve the lives of communities there and Black communities across the country. And it is their work, right, that we are so excited to be lifting up today. And we're so excited for you to also get access to and to learn more about how it is that you can help further the agenda of these two organizations as a way to help further an agenda that improves all of our communities. So with that, I'd like to just pause for any questions or comments that come up in the chat, and then you'll get an awesome opportunity to hear what these freedom fighters are up to.
Hey, Alicia, Nife here. So one question from the chat was, what can other states do online to help out?
Okay, well, one of the things you can do is sign on to the Black Agenda. We are trying to gather as many pledges of support for this agenda to really send a message to the people who seek our votes that these are the cornerstones of the policies that they need to agree to and advance in order to earn our votes. I'm not going to go off on a whole rant about how these elected officials don't feel like they need to earn our votes, but I will say this. Black communities are incredibly powerful in the electoral system. And time again, we are called upon to legitimize, right, and lift up the agendas of others. And yet it's rare that Black communities see that same upliftment in return. And by lifting up the agenda of others, I don't mean other racial communities. I mean other interests inside of government, right, who are trying to get elected, right, or demonstrate that they have our support. But yet when it comes down to the fact of actually legislating on our behalf, they are woefully remiss. And I'm saying that very nicely because we got a reverend on the phone and I'm in the presence of my elders. And I will say this though, there's so much at stake right now that we do not have time and we cannot afford to give our votes away for free. And the fact of the matter is, if they don't hear a call from you, that they need to be paying attention to the things that we want, and that they also need to follow through on that, they will continue to pass us by. Our goal is to secure at least 50,000 pledges on this Black agenda. You can lift up this agenda on your platforms, your web pages, etc., and make sure that people are aware of it. You can also make sure that people are registering to vote by mail, given all the insecurity in our communities around being able to participate in our democracy. It's incredibly important right now that we are enacting a safety net for us to make sure that we can still participate. And the last thing I will say is the Black Agenda is a living and breathing document. This document is really the best collection of what all of our survey respondents agreed upon across demographic, across income, across political affiliation. It is a floor and not a ceiling. We think that the Black Agenda 2020 is the minimum that politicians and elected officials should be doing to address the challenges in our communities. And we would encourage you, right, to use this as a floor, but also be talking to your communities about how it is that we can continue to expand on this agenda to make sure that it really captures the needs, the dreams, the visions, and the hopes of the people in our communities. Any other questions there, Nife?
I think we might have one more, just waiting for them to clarify a little bit. We'll give folks another minute. If you have any other questions, please drop it in the chat box. All right, here we go. How can we as a collective push for the kind of data collection we need to ensure the stories are being represented in this crisis and not as an afterthought?
You know, I'll be honest with you, that was part of the model that we were trying to set with the Black Census Project. Too many times there are polls being conducted with, less than 1% of our communities. And when it comes to including our stories, we're often used as an afterthought. So if you're involved in a data collection project, make sure that our voices are front and center. What we did at the Black Census Project, and we're happy to share, and have a deeper conversation about this at any point, but we did a couple of things to make sure that our stories were being included. One, we made sure that we collected qualitative data and not just quantitative data. And that allowed us actually to get a fuller range of the experiences that people are dealing with every single day. The other thing that we did was we actually trained 100 Black organizers through the process of collecting and conducting this survey. And the reason that we did that is because we believe that data is only powerful when it is used in the service of bringing our communities the justice we deserve. And so while we also wanted to collect data, we wanted to make sure that our partners were armed with the ability to use that data in such a way that it could help us collectively get to our goals. And then the final thing I think is really important in terms of the kind of pushing for the kind of data collection that we need is really to make sure that we are pushing people who are putting out data about our communities to tell the full story of how they collected that data. I can tell you for the last year, I've been hearing stories about us with numbers attached to it, that unless you ask questions about the methodology of how that data was collected, you would think there was something really wrong with Black folks. And so just remember that there are so many ways in which data collection can be liberatory, but there's a lot of ways also that data collection has been used to further the suppression of our communities. So it is important to ask those questions about how was this collected? Who did you collect this from? How many people did you talk to? Because most of the data that you'll see out there will say Black people think this, or Black people want this, but then you find out they only talk to 35 Black people. And you and I both know, not only do we not all know each other, but we definitely don't all think the same. And if you only talk to 35 Black people, you cannot definitively say what all Black people want or what all Black people are going to do.
On that note, we'll conclude Alicia's section on the Black Policy Agenda, some of the work that we're doing. Dr. Manning, Pastor Manning, do you want to transition us over to the next phase of our webinar here? Thank you again, Alicia.
Thank you.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Hold on. All right. Let's see here.
Oh, I got you. Don't worry about it. You're unmuted. We can hear you now.
Can y'all hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you, Alicia, for that presentation. And I do want to just encourage everyone to sign on to the pledge and make sure that our voices are heard. So thank you again. We're excited to have Ubuntu Village that we've been working with at Justice and Beyond for quite some time, and also families and friends of Louisiana incarcerated children in partnership with them. Our concern, and all of us on this call, as we put out the notice for this meeting tonight, are our children being in cages. And in New Orleans, we're very familiar with this because during Hurricane Katrina, we know that many of our youth were left behind incarcerated during Katrina, and were left to battle rising waters and with no drinking water and no food, while those who were placed in charge of them and with the charge of caring for them abandoned them. And so in many ways, the coronavirus is leading to the same abandonment. And so we really want to tackle this issue and make sure that we stand up to protect our young people. So I'm excited to have Gina Womack with us tonight to talk about her work with Flick and what we can do to help. So welcome, Gina.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Johnson was going to go first. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely he was. I do have it right here. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Johnson, Ernest Johnson of Ubuntu Village. Welcome to you, sir. And please tell us about what Ubuntu Village is doing.
Thank you, Reverend Manny. My name is Ernest Johnson. I am the director of Ubuntu Village here in New Orleans, Louisiana. We primarily work around entangling the impact of families impacted by mass incarceration. Intentionally, we decided to name the organization Ubuntu Village because it has a reflection of us as Black people in particular, and how collectively we can be responsible in our particular communities. As Alicia talked about the policies, I was just giving some thought after when she brought on this project and decided for us to be partners, how important it was. And at the time, it may have not seemed as relevant. But as we move forward into the future, we realize that pandemics and historical cultural behavior of those who have always oppressed us never always has a way of reminding us what's the need of us in our Black community. So when COVID-19 hit in New Orleans, it came with a lot of uncertainty around the incarceration of our youth, and particularly understanding that 99% of the youth who are arrested in New Orleans are African Americans, and that the impact it was going to have on our community. It's been kind of fortunate from a local level that we have been able to keep track of the youth in the local detention and have a relationship with the caretakers there, that we are able to monitor it each week. And actually the numbers at the detention center are down opposed to before the pandemic. We was slated with a lot of call burglaries and a lot of things that was becoming frustrated to the point that there was policies being made that was talking about arresting parents and holding the community responsible for them. That has changed. We are currently monitoring the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center on a weekly basis, and we are sort of satisfied with the results at this point, that the numbers are really, really down. It has a capacity of 48. The trend has been between 25 and 29 since the pandemic. There's been weekly judge reviews and hope that each kid that's allotted and able to be released, be released. There are multiple phone calls and also Skype allotted in the facility so that parents can at least talk to their kids and see their kids on a weekly basis. The school is up and running. There's school there between Mondays and Fridays, and there's a number of iPads to ensure that kids are still being educated. And also there's this, from the staff point, there's temperatures being taken on a daily basis that to ensure that COVID is not impacting the facility. So unfortunate in a number of ways, we are sort of satisfied that it hasn't impacted the facility in a way that it caused any deaths or any harm to the kids in any way. But it also leads to us to understand from a pandemic standpoint, that type of production and type of administration hasn't translated over to the state level. And I'll let Gina talk a little bit more about that when she comes on. We haven't had the same results. But I would say from a policy standpoint, I think it's important that through this pandemic that we have an opportunity based on the Black Future Lab census and the surveys that we took, that we utilize this document to ensure when we come out of sort of this pandemic per se, that we're in a collective process to not put ourselves or allow our community to be in these same positions as it often be in. And I think it comes to a point from our organization standpoint that it's gonna take a lot of more actions from a lot of our leaders to ensure that there's a responsibility for those, like you say, we are voting for, but often take us for granted. And even on a local level here, feel like they can change elected offices from time to time, like it's a merry-go-round, but yet the community is distorted and still doesn't have the necessary needs that they need. So my pledge, not only to the Black Future Lab, but to this community, and also not just locally, but nationally, that we take on a responsibility now to ensure that our kids are okay. And to make sure that we're providing them with the necessary tools, because the aftermath of this pandemic is what is gonna cripple us the most, as we have experienced in the past after these disasters and pandemics, and whether it was Hurricane Katrina. We find that our community is distorted, and then we come up with these buzzwords or buzz solutions around trauma-informed and public safety, when we understand that public safety is in education, public safety is in housing, public safety is providing economic opportunities for our community to ensure that they can have livable wages, to ensure that their family have food to eat on the table. And just keeping us overall. I don't have a lot more to say from that aspect. I'm more of an action man, but I think it's important that we rally around each other out, during these times, and ensure that when we come out of this, that we have the support of each other around policies and accountability, and understanding that even though we want to hold government accountable, nobody's coming to save us. So it's important that we understand these solutions and that we have collective processes that we can save ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, when you're able to give the support to your fellow person in a humanity way and have empathy for them, I think that's in a lot of ways more insurance than saying the government is going to bail us out in a way that we're going to be satisfied with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ernest Johnson. What can we do, those on this call, do to assist the Ubuntu Village in your work in criminal justice reform and where you are? What can we do?
Well, I would say one of the first things is to look at the legislative body. We understand that it may not be in full effect at this time, but there are bills like HB 173, and to continue to look at the House bills that may affect parents and families and that are supportive, and try to hold those elected officials accountable from afar off, as we have to do at this time, but to continue to support Ubuntu Village. We always know that resources play a vital role in how we sustain ourselves, but at the end of the day, we can have all the resources we need. If we are not in a collective process and we're divided in what our solutions are, we just kind of going around this tree and just coming back to the same thing. So my wish is that, everyone, whether you're near or far, that we have a collective spirit and hope that we're doing what's best for our Black and brown kids, and to ensure that we are creating a society that's, I won't say that's equal, but there's equity in it that ensure us that we can be happy and people are living in a peaceful way, that we can embody the spirit of Ubuntu and move that in a way that you're thinking about the reflection of your fellow man in a humanity way.
Very good. Would you make sure that your contact information is in the chat so that those who desire to get a hold of you would do that?
I sure will, Pastor.
Right. We thank you for your work and all that you're doing to impact the youth in New Orleans and making sure that those youth that are incarcerated right now are being taken care of. Nobody's going to take care of our children for us. We need to do that on our own, as you so eloquently said, that we can't wait on the federal government. Even on the local government, we've got to do it for ourselves, or else disastrous things are going to happen. So thank you for reminding us of that. And so with that said, again, thank you, Ms. Johnson of Ubuntu Village. Now I want to invite Ms. Gina Womack of FLIC, Friends and Families of Louisiana Incarcerated Children, to tell us about her work and how we can stand with her in supporting her work. Please, Ms. Gina.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for having us come and speak. And it's always a pleasure to share the work of FLIC, Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. I should have gone first. I think you were sending me a message. It's always hard to follow Mr. Johnson. I mean, he's always awesome and amazing with the way he can articulate what is going on. But I will do my very best. We had talked about it, and we thought that it would make sense to do, local work and then do state work. So again, my name is Gina Womack. I am the executive director and co-founder of Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. We are a statewide membership-based organization dedicated to work with families whose children are impacted by the criminal justice system, and that also includes what's going on in the education system. We're membership-based, multi-generational, and we work with, again, to develop leadership for our families who are impacted by the injustice system, as Alicia said, the criminal system, and also the education system. So again, statewide, Louisiana, and I think most people know that we work in a state with some of the worst outcomes for youth. Louisiana has been stated over and over again. Annie Casey, I think, put out something very recently that Louisiana is the state where children are most at risk. So of all the 50 states, we tend to be at the bottom. We ranking at the bottom. We rank at the bottom for education, poverty, mortality, and we represent some of the most vulnerable communities of color. Our families are, they've dealt with various trauma situations. And so basically the threat of this virus is destabilizing. And we're gonna add to that the economic crisis. Families are losing jobs, they're struggling to pay rent. On top of that, they have to fear for the safety of their children. And we talked about, I already heard folks mention Katrina, And ironically, Flick was beginning to look at how our children were doing over the last 15 years post-Katrina, when coronavirus took over our lives. When the governor made it clear that we had to stay at home, it should have been evident that we needed to care for our children as well, all of our children. However, our elected officials continue to make it clear that our children, the children who are put at risk, and the children who end up locked behind bars are an afterthought. I think I heard Alicia say and use the terminology around afterthought. And I was watching a video earlier. Necropolitics is what it's called. It's around social and political power, who gets to dictate how many people may live and how many people may die. And it's unfortunately our children who are in harm's risk, who are locked in cages, are left with the uncertainty of how the virus is going to impact their lives. We continue to hear from our families who are actually, they're very concerned for their children's safety. It's no secret that Louisiana has continued to think that our children are dispensable. Our families are throwaway families. They don't really care about the kids that are there, but there's nothing further from the truth. Our young people, our families love their children. They've consistently sought help for their kids. And during this time, our families are calling and pleading and asking for support in the return of our young people home to their communities where they are loved. And it's unfortunately that families who live in poverty, who have been exposed to our inequitable education system, require support. And when they need that support, they have to turn to the education system. So when when coronavirus hit and we had to take a sharp turn, we continued our normal tactics, because what is happening now is an exacerbation of what has been happening all along. Our families are, again, afterthoughts. Our young people don't have access. So we know that in order to make some change, we need to do direct actions, advocacy, and utilize the media. And so what we've been doing is just that. So from the advocacy, from the advocacy standpoint, from the direct action standpoint, we worked with the Youth First Initiative. Flick works definitely on a statewide level, locally, but we have access to national partners. Flick is a lead organization with our national partners, Youth First Initiative, and they are working with folks across the country who are experiencing incarceration of our young people, just as we are in Louisiana. We joined with over 22 other states, and we sent the letter to the governor. It was very hopeful at that time that we could appeal to him and get him to understand that when you have a stay-at-home order, when you are making a directive for the entire state of Louisiana, that this should also include children who are incarcerated. We were also hoping that because we had a little bit more experience than some of the other states, because we did in fact experience Katrina, that we should have known that when you make a point to say that the rest of the state needs to do certain things, that also includes our young people. And it's definitely unfortunate that over and over again, that we seem to hear from our elected officials that our young people who are incarcerated don't actually have to be taken into consideration. And as the Reverend pointed out, we experience our young people being left behind. When the orders came down to evacuate the city of New Orleans, we took children from outlying places and brought them into New Orleans, and that left them vulnerable. There's a whole documentation that folks can look at, Treated Like Trash, where young people were left to die. Water rose. There was no food, there was no oversight. So it was hopeful that we would have taken lessons and we would have learned that we needed to care for our kids. We needed to move and make sure that they were okay. Those things didn't happen. And we joined with other organizations in the city like Ubuntu Village, Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, Southern Poverty Law Center, and various organizations to put together a letter to the governor. That fell on deaf ears, and so we have continued the various direct actions that have gone forward. There is a petition circulating. I think Dallas may have sent that and put that into the checkbox. So if not, I will make sure to send that to and put it in the box for all folks to be able to sign. There are other organizations that we have supported in regards to doing various motorcades and as such to call attention to incarceration, not only adults, which has gotten a lot of attention, but why has there not been a call from the governor, from other elected officials, other than the Supreme Court, that says that we needed to make sure that our young people are okay? We've done advocacy and we continue to do advocacy. We're calling our family members. We have been supporting the various public defenders' offices, again, the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, as well as the public defenders in the 22nd jurisdiction to help their families get their young people released. We've been writing letters of support, helping put together return home plans for our young people. And it's really striking and unsettling that our elected officials, although as Mr. Johnson mentioned, like in New Orleans, and I do understand that other jurisdictions, maybe Lake Charles, they're doing various things to make sure in the detention centers, the pre-trial young people are released as possible. And but we've been having to work overtime to make sure that young people who, let's remember that 40% of the young people who are locked in cages from the state level are nonviolent offenders. 40% or more young people have disabilities or either severe mental health issues. So those young people should not have been locked up in the first place. And so our work has continued to be a call to action around holding systems accountable, and as accountable as we want to hold our young people. We have worked for the last 22 years. I came to this work about 22 years ago. We developed a process. We passed a law that would actually put things in place that so many young people would not actually end up in the juvenile justice system. Unfortunately, our system has not been as responsible and accountable. And many of those reforms that were put in place to save and support our young people and support our parents have gone unheard. So there was, we did also do a lot of media. So I think, we've definitely, thank you for the support of the Youth First. We were able to get various stories from families in the media, Washington Post, New York Times, the AP, and still our governor remains unresponsive. So that leads us to the larger work that we have to do. We have had some results. The Supreme Court has issued documentation and guidance supporting the release of young people who can safely be returned home, communication with family members, and development of plans. But a lot of things that are missing is definitely something I think I heard Alicia say earlier in regards to keeping, like, who's dispensable. Like the people who work in the facilities are usually Black and brown bodies. The families and those people did not receive a lot of the protective gear that they needed to be able to support themselves so that they would not bring the virus home to their families. And Louisiana at this point still, I believe, stands at the top of the numbers of young people who have tested positive for the virus inside of the youth system. So that definitely speaks volumes of how we are really caring for our young people who are detained. There were some small wins. Mr. Johnson talked about a lot about the young people who are being released from the detention centers. They put things in place like you can get 2 phone calls and stamps for our young people to contact their families. But there has been a discrepancy. There have been young people who have been able to talk to their families via video conferencing, and there are also young people who have not. So the consistency is not happening across the board, which is definitely unfortunate. So moving forward, just to go ahead and wrap things up, again, we have a petition that we put in place. I think it's really important that folks from Louisiana sign on to it, but as well having a national impact so that our governor can understand that the people not only in Louisiana, but around this country feel that young people should be returned home as safely as possible. I'll also include information in regards to being able to do certain things that you can send the governor demands, and you can use social media, and hopefully he will pay attention, which he hasn't been thus far. But again, what's most important is the continuation to think about what Flick has been working on for the long haul. It's really unfortunate that we passed juvenile justice reform, and back early in, once we closed the country's worst prison in 2004, Louisiana was on the forefront of juvenile justice reform, and other states have emulated and worked and passed various reform measures. We would not be in this situation had we, as Mr. Johnson talked about, worked collectively, stayed on the road to reform, and educated our lawmakers from one body to the next to ensure and gave them an understanding on what is important and how we are going to move reform forward. It's not around like being divisive, but rather being collective and having the same message and having a strategy that our opponents already have. And it's unfortunate, I feel, that a lot of times the powers that be, they're prepared for these crises. So just as Katrina happened, folks took the opportunity to tear up and tear down our education system. And this is just another opportunity to utilize and to take advantage, rather, while we're focused on what we need to keep our heads above water. There's a lot of things that are already in place, and it's not about protecting the Black and Brown communities. It's not about protecting folks that are living in poverty. And so, as Mr. Johnson has already said, like, we have to get ahead of this and work collectively together so that we can be in front of crises and we can be together when we plan. Flick has heard, we've been working on this stuff for the last 20 years or so. We have been, we've heard from families, and the majority of the families that we've talked to over the last 20 years allowed us to develop our 3-point platform. So moving forward, the things that folks can do is definitely check out our website periodically so that you can see the work that we're doing. You can utilize our 3-point platform, because much like the agenda that Alicia talked about, these are the things that our families have been concerned about. We need to look at how we can eradicate poverty, how we can ensure that we have an equitable education system, how we can ensure that we have a healthcare system that provides mental health for our young people as well as our families. And so utilize the platform that we have available when you're talking and working with folks in Louisiana. we also were working on a project. It was called the Ujima Project. We were hoping to work with young people who were serving life in the juvenile system, to be when they return home, how we can support them. We need folks to mentor and be available for our young people, to accept them back home, to welcome them back home, and then to also look at providing mentorship for our young people to help look at the plans that they have for their lives. And I think even more importantly is like listen to the families who are most impacted, and hear, not only listen, but actually act on the things that they are saying, because we do know what's most important to what it is that we need. And so register to vote, we talked about that. You can log on to FLIC's website. As partners with the Black Futures Lab, we have an opportunity for you to not only register to vote, check and see if you're already a voter, update your information, sign on to the Black Agenda. You can also do that to our from our website. But you can't just think about voting as a one-time thing. It's about casting your vote, but also getting involved in holding those lawmakers accountable. And then, as I think Mr. Johnson said, support our Black-led and grassroots organizations. There's opportunities. Giving Tuesday is tomorrow. Ubuntu Village and FLIC and Black Futures Lives definitely need your support, not only your bodies, but financial support as well. And so I'm going to stop there and allow for any questions or whatever the process is at this point. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. And I will send you the information, Dallas, right now about the petition and ways to contact our governor and hold him accountable.
Thank you, Gina, for that excellent presentation and for just keeping us aware of what needs to take place and how we can partner with you in direct action and also advocacy. I want to thank you for mentioning specifically mental health. I think one of the things that we saw after Katrina is that many of our youth during the catastrophe and a historic event of Katrina just did not receive the mental health treatment that they needed, and were dealing with so much trauma, and that we did not see the results of that trauma until years later, and I believe we're still dealing with that today. And so as we, and thus is a reason why we're seeing many of our youth incarcerated, because of not dealing with that trauma and the triggers that go along with it. And that's what we'll see again during this time. There are many young people that are going to be dealing with a lot of trauma, as will we all, but especially our young people who just can't really process what's going on right now. And so I know you all are thinking about that and working on that as well too. So thank you.
Thank you for that, for saying that. And I'm sorry to interject, but I mean, as you said, as we all will be dealing with the mental health issues, I mean, we need to think about how we're going to return to the education system and what's that going to look like. And not only our students will be traumatized, but just like you said, much like Katrina, our teachers and everyone will be suffering from trauma. So we definitely need to think about supporting everyone collectively.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we'll take questions at this time for Gina or for Mr. Ernest Johnson from Ubuntu. So please write those in the chat.
All right. So I have a few from some folks submitted earlier. Beyond individuals, are you all thinking about how other Black organizations can endorse and sign on to support some of the work that you all are taking on? Could you just share a little bit about how other organizations that are in this fight along with us can support you all in moving on some of these policies?
Is that for Gina or?
Oh yeah, that could be for Gina or Mr. Johnson.
Are you there, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I think one of the things I think is one is that, identifying specific policies, and I think one of the keys is communication. We have to do a better job of communicating with each other to understand that we're not reinventing the wheel and trying to dismiss the myth that we don't care about each other in a way that we allow such things as enviness and sort of jealousy and a lot of other things that has displaced our community over a period of time. But I think the communication, I think truthful communication on what's our goals and and being intentional about what we want to do and what the expectations are out of each other can take us a long way. So if it's a specific group or a specific individual that wants to connect with us, we put our information in the chat box. And I think collectively, it's important that we continue to move forward in an authentic way and being intentional about what's our expectations to move us forward and dismiss this myth that we don't care about each other, that we don't have the necessary tools to be important, and allowing a system, systemic systems in particular, and individuals to devalue us and put us in sort of these boxes that, that don't have these connections. Too often, I think, we devalue each other and we dismiss each other because we feel as though it doesn't have any value to each other in a way that's beneficial to each other. So I think communication is our key aspect of how we move forward in the future, and being intentional about what the expectations so that people don't become, I guess, re-traumatized. I hear people talk about traumatized, but historically, we have been traumatized over a period of time of a number of major events. But how do we deal with our moving forward and taking a step forward instead of taking a step back, if that is helpful?
So it sounds like the strategy is two-pronged. One, working within our communities to heal some of the harm that's been done, but also reaching out to the folks that are in power in this moment, the decision makers, and making sure that our stories, our issues are at the forefront and moving in order to move some of this change. Gina, I'm going to pivot over to you a little bit. Can you share any anecdotal data or recent success stories about an incarcerated child in light of COVID-19? We may be able to use, the strategy or the advocacy methods that y'all use during this time to model some change that other folks can utilize in their part of the country.
Yeah, I would love to say that there's an amazing success that it has happened. I think Mr. Johnson mentioned that the numbers of young people who have their decrease in the Orleans Parish detention centers, as well as it's my understanding that the numbers of young people who have were incarcerated in the Lake Charles Detention Center have gone down as well, and perhaps some additional detention centers across the state, and that's great. However, I think that we also need to look at, and those are all pre-trial, right? We definitely need to look at the young people and the fact that it's been so complicated to get the young people who have been adjudicated to have access to the same opportunities. And that's just really unfortunate because, first of all, again, as I mentioned, there are about 40% of young people who are incarcerated that are nonviolent or have mental health situations. And so, yeah, there are some successes that we definitely want to talk about. However, I think we just need to really also look at the fact that really and truly these young people should have never entered the system in the first place. And so for us, our work has definitely been looking at historically what our intentionality has been. And in passing the juvenile justice reform, it was all about ensuring that children and envisioning, children and envisioning that children and young people should have the same opportunities. And so for us, our work has definitely been looking at historically what our intentionality has been. And in passing the juvenile justice reform, it was all about ensuring that children and envisioning children and envisioning that children and young people should have the same opportunities. And so for us, our work has definitely been looking at historically what our intentionality has been. And in passing the juvenile justice reform, it was all about ensuring that children children to have access to the services and the supports that they need in their community, and dispelling the myth that our young people are throwaway kids. And although we were able over the years to kind of stop the conversations from happening, it's clear that the inaction of our government and our lawmakers at this moment to look at, as Mr. Johnson said, the humanity in us all, and be able to safely release some of the young people back into their communities where their parents and their mothers are pleading for them to return home during this time, has fallen on deaf ears. So I still think that there's a lot of work to be done, that we can get our governor to really understand that a large number of these kids should not be incarcerated in the first place, and that there's a lot of work that we still need to do to ensure that these children never enter the prison system in the first place.
Awesome. Thank you, Gina. And just to piggyback off that, we have a lot of people on this call today that are looking to lead similar efforts in their own community. Mr. Johnson, what is some advice, some insight that you can share with some of the folks on the call today? Something that they can take away and start something similar to what Ubuntu Village is leading within their own community.
I think one of the keys to some of our success is creating relationships. Without any relationship, there's nothing. And I think utilizing those relationships and looking at it from the lens of humanity have given us the opportunity to be able to explore each individual and not look at them even from a race perspective when we're talking about getting folks to do things that's geared towards mankind, and utilizing those particular people and advancing whatever your cause may be. And I say be intentional about it, because if you're not intentional about it, then your expectations may fall on deaf ears and your energy may be drained with the lack of utilizing it in a more outcome-based way. Often we go into some of these sort of fights and some strategic plannings with the intention of changing the world and not being realistic of the reality of what happened. And often we find that we leave folks disappointed because of the lack of the outcomes and the predictions of not knowing what mankind may have in store for us the next day, leaves us at a disadvantage. So I would say be intentional with your expectations, create relationships that are authentic and trustworthy, be able to leave some of the baggage behind you and not carry some of that energy that's not fruitful and that's not gonna get, and at the end of the day, be realistic about what the outcomes can be and ensure people, in particular people who are living in poverty and poor people that we often talk about, and value them in a way that makes them, know that they are important and that you're giving your best, and that, when you fail, we all fail, and that, we just have to keep moving forward in a way that, brings people some sense of peace in their daily lives, that ensure them that we're someone they can call on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely took something away from that. I'm sure folks are writing this down and they have some good next steps on how to, kind of get the ball rolling on this within their community. I'm sure we have thousands of young folks experiencing the same things that y'all are lifting up right now. And let's figure out ways to bring value into their lives. Let them know that we love them, and let them know that we're here to fight for them as well. So I appreciate you for sharing that input. Gina, I'm gonna go back to you on this one. Could you share a little bit about how mental health of the children are being handled at this devastating time in the city? We know a lot of schools are being shut down right now, so folks aren't, young people aren't getting that type of care and attention that they need, that type of support in this moment. Could you just share a little bit more insight about what you've been hearing from the detention center perspective on this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about it, prior to this administration, we said, well, our former governor, Jindal, said a lot about what he thought about mental health when he closed down very much needed mental health beds. And so, again, we continue to hear a lot about trauma and being trauma informed. Our young people are not doing well, and they haven't been doing well for quite some time. And if and also just to piggyback on what Mr. Johnson was saying, like, divide, united we stand, divided we fall. And if we're not all together, making sure that our young people are okay, as James Baldwin said, we will profit by or pay for whatever they become. And so if you got rid of the many mental health beds after Katrina and before this COVID virus hit, you can only imagine. We have young people that are locked in cages. Their routine has been really torn apart. Inside of the prisons, the educational opportunities, from what we understand, have ceased. The intention, the counselors and all those folks that would normally, and the routine has been altered. In order for young people to stay safe, they may put young people in lockdown. That's never okay. And so it certainly isn't okay when, a young people's routine has been challenged and actually put aside because the people who are in positions of power did not act for these young people when the call to shelter in place came down. When the governor sent down that order and they were talking about groups of 10, then we knew the system should have known there were 12 kids in a dormitory, and if we only needed 10 people in the space, things could have quickly happened to secure and make sure that these young people are okay. The young people cannot talk to their families. And just imagine the stressors on the families that can't connect with their young people. They can't really talk to them. They can't see them. And I might could talk to you on the phone, but if I can't see the look in your eyes, then I'm going to be stressed out. And young people know that their family members are stressed out. And on top of that, young people on the inside have family members who are dying from the coronavirus and can't attend funerals. I mean, there's just like, this is such an unprecedented phenomenon that we already know if a young people is locked in a cell and taken away from their community and their families, what that does to a mental psyche. Add to it that now we have whatever consistency may have been available is no longer available. I'm cut off from the education system that I may have been getting, and the consistent possibility of treatment and rehabilitation. Those things are probably no longer in place. The counselors or whomever was coming in and out that was supporting me are possibly no longer coming because they're, they had to be cut off from their access to the facility. I can't talk to my parents, my mom. I don't think we have to think very far as to what that is doing to the young people and their mental health, who where it was already compromised. And if you're utilizing an isolation cell to support me, that's not, that's not really helpful. So you can't lock down children who may have been exposed to, or isolate young people who have may have been exposed to the coronavirus in isolations for 23 hours a day. That's not good practice on a good day. And it certainly isn't good practice during this time of the coronavirus. And it's frustrating that we hold our children, our most vulnerable assets, to a higher standard than we hold our system. And we're not sending a good message to young people that they matter and that they're actually being cared for. And on top of that, let's add the mental health to from our families who cannot connect to their children. And I've heard from some parents, and they're like, I just need to see his face. I heard from him one day, and I haven't been able to talk to him for a couple of weeks. Yeah, there's just enough trauma that goes around, and that's going around. And some of the trauma is induced that should not have had to happen, because I'm going to keep saying that Louisiana should have been a little bit more prepared to be able to handle this crisis, because we had the experience of Katrina, and we shouldn't have wanted to do what we did before, not to move to make sure that we could do the best possible movements for our young people and send young people who could safely be released to home. So now we have young people who are spending time in prison and in isolation during this time, and we're going to have to deal with that on the back end. And it's shameful that we find ourselves in this situation again, because we had a little bit of a jump start on some of the other states who are actually getting this and have released young people safely home to their community.
Thank you so much, Gina. We have one last question, and we'll close out from there. And just to take a step back in this conversation, we talked a lot about what's been going on locally, what's been going on statewide. But the one big thing that is on all of our minds is this upcoming election in November. And I know there are a bunch of them happening across the country. Let's say we have we get all the electoral victories that we want in 2020. Alicia, what I think a lot of us on this call are also having in the back of our mind is, now what is the next step after that to bring about the change that we want to see? Could you share a little bit about your insights into that and some strategies that you think we can move beyond 2020 to create this change that we're looking for?
Yep. So thank you again to everybody for joining and for staying with us. It's actually just heartwarming to see so many people from across the country. Here's the thing, y'all. For me, the motto that I've been taking with me every single day in the worst of times, and times that I think will get worse, is the idea that there's infinite possibilities for our freedom. And, the Black Futures Lab, the Black to the Future Action Fund, we are not hanging our hopes or our hat on what happens in November. We will do everything that we need to do to make sure that our communities are present and making the demands that we need to be making. And we also know that the work that we're focused on is making sure that we have the kind of infrastructure we need to be powerful. So we've got a couple of things on deck that we really want to make sure that people are aware of. One, of course, this agenda is perfect for advocacy, particularly when new budget cycles start. So I know in our state, California, the new budget cycle is starting in 2021. So we are prepared, right, to make sure that this agenda is on the plate of every lawmaker in this state beginning in January of next year. We also are doing a lot of work to invest in you all and in us to build our capacity to design and win and implement policy in cities and states across the country. We don't know what's going to happen in the White House, but we do know that there's a lot of impact that we can have right where we live. And too often, right, unless you are a part of an organization that has the know-how and the capacity to do this kind of advocacy with your city council or with your governor's office, oftentimes we have to depend on other organizations who may or may not share our frameworks or our interest. And so we are actually getting ready to open up a policy fellowship that is called the Black to the Future Public Policy Institute, where we will be taking applications from leaders in our communities across the country, training our people on how to, put the solutions that we know work, right, into policy that we then pass and get money for. So if you want to be a part of that, make sure to sign up for action alerts from the Black Futures Lab and Black to the Future Action Fund, and you'll be the first to know when the applications are released on May 15th. We plan to make this a project where essentially we would support your organization in having you go through this fellowship, and we would also support your organization in helping to run a policy campaign in your state or in your city. And so all of these changes that people like Mr. Johnson and Ms. Gina are talking about, I mean, they have both been doing policy work forever. And the fact of the matter is, I know they look around the table and they are one of the only ones that look like them. And so we need a lot more of our folks at the table, knowing how to put the rules into the kinds of format that becomes the governing laws of our communities. Finally, we are going to continue to engage our communities in electoral organizing up and down the ballot. We know that there is a big race for the Senate as well, no matter who ends up in the White House. If we don't take back these instruments of power, we are going to consistently be in a place of disadvantage. And so we are going to be making sure that we take back the Senate and also ensure that there are more Black progressive folks who are stepping up to take on these roles. Because again, frankly, when you look at bodies like the Senate, there's only one of us, and that has impact on what the laws are that govern this country. And so those are a couple of next steps that we'll be taking that are beyond 2020, beyond the election in 2020, but we encourage y'all to walk with us and our teams, right? Because this year we're only 4 months in at this point. We still have a lot of work to do this year. So we're happy to give you the forecast of what happens after November, but the story has not been written about what's happening in November. So we're very, very focused on that, and so honored and blessed to be in partnership with Flick and Ubuntu Village and Black-led organizations across the country, making sure that our voices are being heard and our solutions are being legislated.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I think that was, I think that's about our time. And so I just want to thank Alicia and Mr. Johnson and also Gina, and for all of you for joining us on tonight. Again, I'm Reverend Manning with Justice and Beyond. Justice and Beyond has many leaders who we call pillars, who come together to set the vision and see about the future programming of Justice and Beyond. If you are located in Louisiana or New Orleans and want to be a part of Justice and Beyond, you can always email me at gmanning1973@yahoo.com, gmanning1973@yahoo.com. Let us know that you want to be a part of Justice and Beyond and be on our mailing list. Just a few words in closing. There is a lot of power on this platform tonight. A lot of people who are doing some tremendous and amazing things. Part of the way we stay divided is because we don't connect with each other. And so many of you had not heard of Ubuntu Village before this call, nor had you heard of Flick. And Flick needs to hear of you, and Ubuntu Village needs to hear about your work, because it is related to their work. And so we need to be brought together. And so please connect with each other and let each other know I'm doing the same work or I'm interested in the same work, and come together and let's sit at the table together. Don't let the message that's being put out in the media keep us from uniting together. I believe this is our moment to recreate ourselves. This is our moment to reinvent ourselves and do some extraordinary things as a Black people to come together. I believe that we can reinvent ourselves with economic development, with education, with healthcare. We can do some things for ourselves instead of waiting on federal government to provide for us. This is our moment. So don't let the noise deflect from what we can do for ourselves. And finally, we recognize, all of us, I'm sure, that we are working within a very flawed system that is flawed by racism and has been for a very, very long time. However, it is what we have. And part of what we have now is a system that works by getting the census that takes place every 10 years. It is important that all of you would do your part in making sure that you are counted. So I want to raise that up on tonight. Many census takers are going from door to door and making sure they know how many people are in that household. Do your part, either by phoning in to the Census Bureau or filling out the form that was sent to you, or by just simply answering the door so that you can get counted, so federal funding can flow and get such funding into areas such as transit and education and healthcare that is so vitally needed in our community. So with that said, again, thank you for each of you for tuning in and coming into this platform tonight. Remember that you are powerful, and that no matter what the media wants us to believe by touting such numbers as 70% of African Americans are affected and dying from COVID-19, that makes us seem weak, that we don't have power. I don't believe that that's true, because we are the best of the best that survived the Middle Passage that came over from Africa. We are the best of the best. We are survivors, and there is power within each of us. So let's join together, put our collective minds and hearts together. I want to leave you with a word of prayer on tonight as we pray for safety and strength and power. Lord God, our Creator, we believe right now, and we stand steadfast with the understanding that you created us for this moment, that we are living at this moment for a reason, that we are breathing at this moment for a reason, that we have the power, that we have the insight, that we have the intelligence, that we have the will, that we have the stamina to survive this moment, to speak into this moment, to bring our abilities into this moment, to create change and to make it a different world than what we were pre-corona. God, we pray that when we leave this moment and come out of this temporary time, that we will be a better people, that we will be a better nation, that we will be a better ethnic group of Black people, that we will raise up new industry, raise up new forms of education, raise up new economic sources, raise up new agricultural endeavors, oh God. Speak into our minds so we can do just that, so that we leave elevated and not limited, oh God. And so now, God, I pray a special blessing on everyone who is on this call. Grant them health and strength and healing and peace in their life right now. I ask it in the name of my Savior, Jesus. Amen. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us on tonight. God bless you and good night.